Well, good evening, everybody. Good to see all of you out there on this wonderful Wednesday after a couple of weeks being off. It's good to see everybody coming back into the building. Couple announcements, just reminders. Number one, in 2 weeks, or actually a week almost now, on the 20th is Hunter's first Sunday here as our pastor, and there is a potluck afterwards. So if you have any questions on that, you can see Karen. So she's in charge of that stuff. So we're really looking forward to that. Next week, Nick Polk is coming in to talk about Tolkien and artistry. So that'll be an exciting thing. But tonight we have a special guest, and one that I've looked forward to having to come in because I love history, especially church history. It's why I ended up on the journey I did, because I studied both general church history and the history of the tradition I came from and found it wanting. And also found out a lot of reality about what the church is like, which is really helpful for us to understand. So tonight we have Dr. Steve Hoskins, who is the professor of church history at Trevecca and the founder of the Nazarene Historical Society. They have a Facebook page, they have events. I would definitely ask you to go out and look up the Historical Society because it's a fairly new,
about 2 years old.
About 2 years old. I think your first meeting was at the Wesley Theological Seminar here.
It was,
here.
And then we moved, when we had a quick meeting at Asbury, and then this last year we were at Baylor.
Okay.
They keep live bears on the Baylor campus. Were you aware of that, Brandon?
I did not. I think you're live.
Yeah, I'm live.
Yeah.
Yeah, they keep live bears.
Live bears?
Live bears. They have a pen. I've often thought churches should consider keeping live bears. Kind of bring the folks in. You know, we try a lot of things these days to get people, into the church. But at Baylor, they actually, they're the Baylor Bears.
Right, yes.
And I'm just walking down the campus, and I hear this knocking, and I turn around, and there's this sort of, plexiglass see-through pen, and there are two live bears waving at me. And I didn't know if you all had live bears, but I think we're safe for the moment.
Yeah, I think, no live bears. There might be some bear-like people.
Yeah,
but
that's okay.
Exactly.
That's okay. But no, the Nazarene Historical Society is a group of us, some scholars, some pastors, who all, just like you, have an general interest in church history. And then a number of us have done, work in specific areas. And so we get together and we share that work. We work with some local sites. We have now put three out. There'll be a picture of it here later. We've actually put three, and we're getting ready to add our fourth site to the Nazarene Historic Registry. There are a few rules there about what's historic and what isn't. But anyway, we do that kind of work, and it's some of the most fun that I get to have because I go to a lot of places and do a lot of history work, a lot of paper presentations, but not very often do I get to do it with Nazarenes. And being with Nazarenes is mostly okay. Can everybody say amen? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's mostly okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm a church historian, Brandon. I work with two things, time and dead Nazarenes. I don't know if any of you all have worked with living Nazarenes, but they're fairly difficult to work with. I have the best job in the church. I work with dead Nazarenes, and they're much easier to work with than the living. Just trust me, they don't talk near as. Do you all have any Nazarenes here who just can't quit talking? I'm probably saying things I shouldn't say on the live stream, but I've been known to do that before. But I work with the dead ones. They have a lot less to prove. And they're fairly enjoyable company, and that's why we're here tonight. I think is to talk about that.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
We can go to the next slide. This presentation is entitled "An Adventure to the End of the World." Part of the difficulty with history is that we think about it all wrong. We think about it as a dead account of dead people, when it's really giving a vote to our ancestors in our present. It's a living account of the faith of the dead, those who have established themselves and have run the race, as Paul said. Henry Glassey says, history's not the past. History is the creation of things out of our past designed to be a useful roadmap in our future. Who thinks we need a better roadmap to the future? Look at the hands. Look at this. We really need a better roadmap. And Glassy says that's what history does, because it allows us to both in the present, but to go backwards and forwards in time to think about our future. Very, very important. What most of my colleagues miss, who are not historians, they're boring Bible scholars, systematic theologians, people I just don't like to spend a lot of time with. They're just, again, they talk a lot. They're living Nazarenes. But it's amazing to me, because when you think about history as a Christian, like, the coolest thing I could tell you tonight is this: when we get to the end of history, when we get to our future, to the ultimate end of all things, we call that heaven. We don't talk about it much anymore. It's hard for us to imagine heaven given where we're living today. But when we get to the future, waiting on us will be our past, with open arms and nail-pierced hands, and marks where a crown of thorns once rested. And the neatest thing I can tell you tonight is, because we are Christians, we can even remember our future. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about the Nazarenes. You can go to the next slide. The Nazarenes are fascinating. We're going to talk about this. The Nazarene church is like your neighbor who started out in a tent and eventually, after 20 years moved into a single wide. Anybody here ever lived in a single wide? I was born for free on a military base in South Carolina. And I was taken home. I was literally carried home across the road. We did not own a car. And I was carried home to a single wide trailer in a single wide trailer park in Sumter, South Carolina, full of single wide Nazarenes. There were 36 single wide trailers. The Bowens owned it. And everything was a sin. Nothing was allowed there. No coffee. Forget TV, radio. Everything was wrong. It's just the way it went. And after a while, you're successful enough and you move into a decent house and, things proceed. The Nazarenes literally start with practically nothing in terms of the way churches start these days. A few thousand church members, maybe 100 churches around the world, and about 3 or 4 missionaries. And so what I try to tell people is the best way to think about Nazarene history is to think of it as going on an adventure. This is my very first Nazarene adventure. That's me. I'm 8 weeks old. That is the Nazarene camp. Thank you so much. That's the Nazarene campground. There's the tabernacle. We were holiness people in those days. We had no air. There are no fans in that tabernacle. They had to put it up with poles that were bent, and the federal government actually refused to use them. They were sort of telephone pole size, and because they were bent, so we tried to unbend them and covered them with creosote, which, by the way, was still there 20 years later. My uncles built that place. And at 8 weeks of age, I went on my first adventure, and they took me to camp meeting. That's the songbook, Sing Praises. Some of you will remember when Nazarenes had songbooks that littered our piano benches, littered our churches. They were everywhere. There are Wesley hymns in there. It was interesting. There are camp meeting hymns, Man of Sorrows, What a Name, For the Son of God Who Came, Ruined Sinners to Reclaim, Hallelujah. Songs like that. And we were sanctified Nazarenes in South Carolina, thought we knew better than anybody else. Now, there are reasons for this. After they took that picture, they took me over to the nursery for the evening service, and they handed me to the young mother who was keeping the nursery, whose name is Nina Gunter. She was the first woman elected general superintendent in the history, and they handed me to Nina, and they tell me sparks flew. Just a great meeting of history. And Nina did not think much of me, so she put me down on the floor next to our DS. Dr. Dwight Moody Gunter II. This is just true. And Dwight was about 1.5 years old, and I was 8 weeks old, and we've been friends ever since. But that's what Nazarenes did, and they went on adventures. That camp meeting was indicative of the soul of South Carolina Nazarenes. We didn't have any money. We didn't have a lot of fancy stuff. The lights in there, Brandon, were glowing yellow bug lights to try and keep the mosquitoes off. This is just true. They were glowing that hung down on those single wires. There's not a fire marshal in the world who would let that pass today. And we would gather there every summer because we did have the one thing in our lives that mattered, and that was God and God's presence. And we would sing out of these books. And one night the lights went out. We had a storm come through. And we had nothing, so people just started singing. And, we sang as many songs in that book as we could. We sang for 4 hours. We sang all those church songs, and then somebody started singing, "Once I Was Aimless, Life Filled with Sin." Every Nazarene knew all the words. "I wouldn't let my dear Savior in. Then Jesus came like a stranger in the night, and praise the Lord, I saw the light." That's us. We go on adventures. We're in this not because of what we have or what we can get, but because life with God is that much fun.
No, I like that. And I also grew up at a camp, not Nazarene, but we didn't have air conditioning either.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I know.
Was it in South Carolina?
No, it was
Then
here.
It wasn't really
It was Middle
camp.
Tennessee. Yeah,
That's not
I know.
really a camp. South Carolina is the holiness Nazarenes. The rest of you all are just Nazarenes. We have Nina. Who do you have?
She's here now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. She's here now. I sit with her in Sunday school every Sunday.
Just the picture of the adventure.
Yeah.
And I hope that that's a little of what you take away is adventure. And it's not just our history, but it's our future and it's our present as we move through a journey. Because I think that's the beauty of who we are as Christians, and especially as Nazarenes.
Well, I think so. And I think that part of what the past reminds us of is there are some journeys we should never let go of. Going to camp is one of those journeys. Camp is just integral to our faith. I got saved for the first time at that altar. Don't ask me how many more times I had to get saved before it took. It was a few. But going to camp was where we made. I'm still friends with Dwight Gunner. It's been over 60 years. That's a necessary part, I think, of what it means to be Nazarene.
Yeah, and I think the hymns, the songs,
Yep.
those touch who we are.
Yep.
Those of us that grew up with hymns, or hymn books, mostly over here, I'd say.
Yeah. Hymnals are making a comeback, not with Nazarenes, but with everyone else. One of the hottest selling books in Christianity right now is a new hymnal that was put out by Seedbed Press. It's called Our Great Redeemer's Praise. I was on the hymnal committee, and the guy called me and said, "Do you want to be on the hymnal committee?" I said, no one does hymnals anymore. He said, "Well, we do." And these Methodists have found a need to get back into some theology, back into some better ways of forming Christians. And so they're printing a hymnal again. So you never know.
Well, and it shaped. You still remember those songs. I still remember songs. I know how bad some of the theology is from things I learned.
But I know how good some of the theology
yes,
is.
exactly.
Years I spent in vanity. My kids don't know this, Brandon. Years I spent in vanity and pride, caring not my Lord was crucified, knowing not it was for me he died on Calvary. Mercy there was great and grace was free. Pardon there was multiplied to me. There my burdened soul found liberty at Calvary. Now that's great, and I think we miss some of that.
Yeah, and those of you in Pastor Terry's class, you'll know how important he takes song lyrics. But when Jacob was here,
is this the Eagles or is this real Christian music, Terry?
But
I'm trying to date me and Terry right here.
Jacob hated seeing Pastor Terry come up on Sunday morning because he usually knew what line it was too, that Terry was going to ask him about. Because Jacob also came to understand how important it is for us to sing the things that we truly believe rather than the things that others believe. Not that.
Well, and again, if you're a Christian, and it's not like, again, kids, it took me more than one trip to the altar. I was not the most willing Nazarene. I was not the kid that they thought was ever going to be Steve Hoskins. But if you really believe what we're taught about the way the world is put together, In the church, when we lift our voices in praise to God, we join in singing with the angels. My goodness. You know, we didn't have any money, but we got together in that old barn of a building that my uncles built, along with a bunch of other kids, and we got to join our voices with angels' voices. What an adventure, you know. But you got to learn to see things the right way. Let's go to the next slide. We got a bunch of slides. You keep an eye on the time. My first Nazarene memory is this right here. How many of you all remember sanctified Sunday evening services at 7 o'clock? Yeah, I've got a few of you who were like, and how many of you like me were dragged to church against your will? Okay, yeah, yeah. And my parents brought me to Trevecca when I was 2. I've been trying to get out ever since, and I must have done something to make Jesus very angry because I've been in Trevecca for a very long time, tried to work off my sins, but I didn't say that because we're Nazarenes, we don't believe in it. But anyway, my parents lived in a little house that no longer sits there where the Towers parking lot is. Behind Trevecca. There were 3 little row houses there. We lived in the second one, and my parents had a television set. Anybody remember those old box TV sets? That's the only picture I could find of the one we owned. It's not a true picture, because in the true pictures of the ones we owned, there's a green tablecloth that's over the sides, so that when the Nazarenes came to visit, my mother could cover it and make it look like a table, because having a television set was not just not allowed at Trevecca, it was a sin, and it got you put on social probation. And I would sit down at 6:30 and the Cape Crusader came on, and about that time that Batman was over the pit. Anybody remember? The Riddler, the Joker, the Penguin, and he needed my help. You remember Bam? Boom, remember? And about that time, my mother, father who sanctified people, I guess. Anyway, they said, it's time for church. And they would grab me by the hand and turn the TV set off. And we would go on an adventure. And they would drag me against my will out the front door, down the tiny little porch, off the porch, 3 flat stones that made its way to the sidewalk. And we would turn right. And we would walk to church. It's the old church up on the campus at Trevecca on the right side of Jesus. And don't you always want to be on the right side of Jesus? If you know where the Jesus statue is, just look right, or his right, your left. And there's the church. And they were real Nazarenes. There was no air in there. Are you sure you all are Nazarene? Because there's a lot of stuff going on in here. But there was no air, and the windows were always up, and they only knew 2 songs. They sang the same songs every Sunday night. Jesus, 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 sweetest name I know, and there's within my heart a melody. And I can still hear them singing. And we would go on this adventure with me being dragged by the arm against my will, literally kicking and screaming to get back to the Cape Crusader. And I would hear the choir sing the last verse. Anybody of Jesus, Jesus, Jesus? Adventure verse, Nazarene song. Soon he's coming back to welcome me. Far beyond the starry skies, I will take my flight to worlds unknown. Adventure. I will reign with him on high. Jesus, 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 sweetest name I know. Fills my every longing. Keeps me singing as I go. And that was my adventure every Sunday night, just going to church. Were you ever dragged to church?
Yes.
You were, because you seem like a nice person. I'm sure Terry Hedges was dragged to church. Against his will. I know I was.
Yes.
But this is kind of how Nazarenes did their business. Go to the next slide. We'll get to the history stuff. This is one of the earliest Trevecca adventures. If you see that Union Gospel wagon there, that wagon was owned by something called the Union Gospel Tabernacle, which you know as the Ryman Auditorium. Ryman Auditorium was built in 1892. If you go visit it today, there's a big plaque up on a cement plaque says, Union Gospel Tabernacle. And we built Trevecca right behind them. We shared an alleyway. It was our 3rd location. We had just moved there. We were starting to get students. And on Saturdays, they would load the Trevecca kids up in the wagon that they borrowed. The Union Gospel Tabernacle was also a mission. And that wagon was taken from where the Ryman is down to the river. and they would load up people coming in off the barges and boats, workers, and they would give them shelter, give them food, preach the gospel to them. And so we would borrow it, and we would go on adventures at Centennial Park every Saturday afternoon. That right there, kids, is cutting edge technology, gospel ministry. You see the minister, there's an actual pulpit there. He took his choir with him. And if you cannot tell it, the painted pictures are scenes from the life of Jesus. And they would use that to explain the gospel to people who would respond. They would hear a sermon and they would come forward, people would pray with them, and they would introduce them to, you can see the Good Shepherd, Jesus the Good Shepherd. And this was just a regular Saturday afternoon adventure. Do you all ever go on adventures?
Not quite like that.
I tell Hunter, I said he should start Adventure Ministries. Do you have a full job description?
I do.
You do? What about Terry? We could
Yes,
make
he
Terry
does as well.
The minute he does as well. Yeah, we could make him the adventure minister and take you all on adventures in the name of Jesus. This is what it meant to be a Nazarene. This was the fun part of things. Go to the next slide. This is our original adventurer. This is the founding general superintendent of the Church of the Nazarene, Phineas Franklin Bresee. We got him in his old age. By the time Brother Bresee had founded the Church of the Nazarene, actually it started in 1907, not the 1908 date that you always hear. It's because the people from Texas are difficult. We actually started the Church of the Nazarene in a civilized city in Chicago, Illinois, down literally around the corner from the University of Chicago. We could have been famous, but that wouldn't do. No, we had to go to Outback, Texas in 1908. But Bresee thought that, you needed to be an educated minister and an adventurer. And his adventure was called Neighborhood Witness. That's Phineas Bresee at the 1908 General Assembly, in Pilot Point, Texas, underneath a tent up there in the corner. That's a street map of Pilot Point, Texas. And he is teaching Nazarenes as one of his first acts, if not his first act, as the first elected general superintendent of the Church of the Nazarene. He is teaching them how to witness to their neighborhood and invite people to church. Now that's an adventure. Who lives in the neighborhood these days? Has it got any bohemians here? Any crazy people in the neighborhood?
Well, I think we're all a little bit like that.
Okay, yeah. That's okay. But I mean, yeah. think about this. He said the way to do your business with God as a church is to go on an adventure and go out and meet your neighbors. How many of you can name 5 of your neighbors and say, I know them on a first name basis? Yeah, it's always old people. Oh, one young person. Or do you have an old soul? No, okay, yeah. I'm not sure if they think he's telling the truth, but he probably is. He seems like a nice young man. But, so many people these days don't know their neighbors. Yeah. And the neighbors, therefore, don't know their church. And, Bresee said this is the way that to win the world to Christ is knocking on one door at a time. What are we doing? And that leads me to the question, what are we doing to bring our neighbors into the fellowship of Christ's holy church? I didn't come to get on you, but somebody's got to.
No, that is, and I think the neighborhood still, and it is a part of the soul of this congregation, at least since the last 8 years that we've been here, that the neighborhood is on our minds all the time, and we at least engage with our neighbors. I think we know a lot of the neighbors around us, some of them because people like to complain about things sometimes,
I can't
the
imagine.
sound of the air conditioner.
I do church work. I can't imagine that people would, again, I work with dead church members, okay? People who never complain, okay? This is why I work with dead people.
But we also know some of them because we've reached out when we heard that they lost someone, or they've needed something, or someone was hungry and they showed up at the church. So I think that is part of the adventure of who we are, and I hope that we continue doing that as a denomination, especially because it's in our roots.
Well, it's in our roots, and what a church is set up to do is only what it can do in ministry. Very interesting. Brazee came to us from the Methodist Church of the 19th century. Brazee died in 1915. By then, he was almost 80. He had been elected a delegate to the Methodist General Conference 3 or 4 times in the 1800s, and he's from Iowa. And every Methodist church in the world, practically, that was built in America between 1850 and 1940 had three buildings. I mean, 3 rooms in the building. They had a sanctuary to worship the Lord. They had a kitchen space, or what they would have called a formal parlor. They had a kitchen space and a table, place for people to eat, place for kids to hold hands, supervised, you know what I'm saying? And I mean, it's just true. And then they had a library. And those were the places where the people in the neighborhood, church members or not, they came and they learned to read good books. They could converse about big and important ideas with a church that was up on its reading of the scripture and with each other. They knew, you know, that you could come to the church and people would take care of you, meet your needs. We have to remember that. As much as we do a lot of the stuff to set up, you know, in a technological age to reach out and do the internet stuff, church can only do what it's set up to do. And Brazee knew that. And that's him. Go to the next slide, please. That is the 1908 General Assembly meeting. That's the group in Pilot Point, Texas. When I tell you there weren't many of them, and there weren't much to look at. For most of them, that's probably the only good suit of clothes that they owned, if they owned more than one set of clothes. These were folks from rural parts of America. If you read Timothy Smith's Revivalism and Social Reform, Smith says that when the Church of the Nazarene came together, you had this interesting meeting of rural and urban was about 10 churches, you know, in downtown areas. Brazee was a part of urban, but the Texas people were all rural. And these rural folks wanted to have fellowship with other Christians. They wanted to be a part of a church with a nationwide, and by the way, an international outreach. When the Church of the Nazarene comes together in 1908, there are 5 missionaries already on the field, having been there quite some time, that joined the church. The most famous of which, if you read Nazarene history, Nazarene missionary books when you were a kid, like I was forced to do, you know, my family would read them to you. You know, so you had no excuse. Again, difficult people, Nazarenes. But if you read missionary books, you heard the name Schmelzenbach, Sons of Africa. I've actually taught the great-grandson of Harmon Schmelzenbach, the original Nazarene missionary. And so they're in this crowd. And when they got together on October 13th in 1908 in Pilot Point, Texas, and decided to form the church. Actually, it was called the Pentecostal Holiness Church of the Nazarene. We dropped Pentecostal from our name when some people kept visiting our services thinking that we spoke in tongues, and we didn't. It was a little difficult. And so we dropped that. But when they got together, they were so excited, they went out and had an adventure. Of course, in Pilot Point, there's not much to do, so they just walked around the tent about 50 times and sang songs together. We're marching to Zion. I've pitched my tent in glory. I don't know if you remember that one. But that's our original group. They came back together in 50 years, and all the people who were still alive in that picture got together and made another picture. And there's only about 40 of them left. And, you know, very, very fascinating, though. There were people who came to that spot on the railroad. This is 1908. There were no cars reported. They came on what they called prairie schooners, so horse-drawn wagons. You know, they put tents, you know, sails up to kind of help push the horses along. But, you know, you had to want to be there. You know, they lived in a world where you learned a whole lot about yourself because the choices that you made cost something. They cost you something. They required investment in time. And these folks were serious about winning the world to Christ. And that's the original General Assembly meeting in 1908 that the church calls its anniversary date. If anybody has questions, just raise your hand. We'll answer them as we go. Happy to answer any questions about our history that you have. They were didn't know they were being sociologically cutting edge. They allowed women to be ordained from the very first beginnings of the Church of the Nazarene, which made everybody think we were leftist woke liberals, which we weren't. We were also temperance people, and so we didn't drink. But they believed that the gifts for ministry in the church were the responsibility of the Spirit, and not the responsibility of the church to determine who was fit from the get-go. And so if the Spirit saw fit to call a woman into the ministry, they were okay with that. And that's an interesting place to be in 1908. It really is. But they were really something, and very, very serious.
No, and we like to point that out when people ask questions. Some things happened around the 50s or 60s.
Well, no, World War II happened.
Yeah, which
And
yeah.
You hate to tell stories these days that sound sexist, but World War II happened. And when in 1934 they took a poll, it was 1 out of every 3 Nazarene ministers was a woman. So, literally, it was like 35%. And then World War II happened, and when men came home from war, their wives started having babies and raising families. And so women began to disappear from the ranks of the folks who were doing the work of ministry. It's one of those sociological phenomenons. And that's sort of what happened. Now, a lot of people these days make more out of that than they should. When you get to the 60s and 70s, you can say we were being sexist.
Yeah.
But that's not really how it got started.
60s and 70s.
Yes. Yeah. They did not speak in tongues. Because, all right, so here's an interesting fun fact of church history. The charismatic movement, as you know it, starts in the stroke of midnight, 1900 in Topeka, Kansas, and doesn't really catch on fire until 6 years later in a place called Azusa Street, where Azusa College is. And the Azusa Street revival in 06 makes its way to the East Coast in 07. 2 men go to Azusa Street named Cash Dollar and Pike, and they bring it back this way. And as the Church of the Nazarene is being founded, so is what we call the charismatic renewal movement. The word Pentecost was a reference to Acts 2, that when the Spirit came when the church preached the word and witnessed to the world. And what Brzee said we want the spirit, right, of a Pentecostal revival. And so when Pentecostal language was used, it was used in connection with revivals. And Nazarenes, we're going to talk about this here in just a second, but Nazarene churches saw themselves, general superintendents just said this, they didn't see themselves as churches, they saw themselves as revival centers. They were hotbeds of networks of, how many of you like me grew up in a church that just had one revival after another, and then you went to zone revivals, and then you went to camp meeting and had a revival, and so Pentecost was really code for that. I mean, kind of in the same way that the word Nazarene was code word for angry Methodist. A lot of people don't know that Nazarenes are Methodist in their origin and in their theology. Because so many Nazarenes preach like Baptists, but I didn't say that because we're on the internet and, I'll get hate mail. I don't care. It's shoskins@trevecca.edu. I say that because I have students in the house. That's why. And so that reference to Pentecostal was something different. Well, by 1919, so 11 years after this picture, the Church of the Nazarene is one of the 10 fastest growing churches in America in its first 15 years. It's really an amazing, statistically, we hit the note. And, whatever we were doing in local, villages and farm communities, and then, really big cities, Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, Boston, not, cities like Nashville. It hit a chord and people were coming. And a lot of people saw that word Pentecost or Pentecostal And they thought we were associated with the Azusa Street movement. And it caused a lot of really difficult problems, a lot of fights, a lot of issues, just to be honest with you. Yeah. Let's go to the next slide. You keep your eye on time. Keep your eye on time.
I'm watching.
We can go past this one. This is an adventure on the streets in Kansas City. By 1912, the Nazarenes had headquartered their life in Kansas City. In 1911, the Nazarenes were looking for a permanent home. Los Angeles was too far away. Boston was too far away. People had had enough of going to Texas. Do I need to say anything else? If you've been to Texas, it's just really difficult. They keep bears, live bears, on the campus. You just can't believe it when you go there. It's like, who lets live bears loose near college students? Who thought this was a good idea? You know, certainly somebody who needs to have their head examined. I won't tell you Baylor is Baptist, but I didn't say that. But anyway, they were looking for a home. So in 1911, they hold the Nazarene General Assembly in the Ryman Auditorium, the Union Gospel Tabernacle. They're trying to bring Trevecca in. Trevecca never joins during J.O. McClurkin's lifetime. He dies in 1914. We join in 1915. And had we agreed to become Nazarene, the Nazarenes would be headquartered here. Thank God we did not agree to that. And so in 1912, they found land in downtown Kansas City, literally on Troost Avenue. And they started a publishing house. They built a church. And all this was right there together in one little Nazarene Central. The general superintendent's offices were there. And this is the youth group from Nashville, from Kansas City First Church of the Nazarene, going out to witness for Jesus. It's an adventure. They played an unholy instrument called a guitar. There are squeeze boxes there, if you know what that is. There are people playing the fiddle. They told me that was not what they called it. They called it something else. But they dressed up to go on adventures, and they went around adventuring in that. If you can't tell what that is, that vehicle is called a hearse. And so we took our youth group out for adventures in a death wagon. I'm just saying, you know. But this is what adventures were like in the early Church of the Nazarene. We got the kids together and we went somewhere and we let them loose on the streets and said, tell everybody you know about Jesus Christ. In Nashville, we did the same sort of thing, and instead of dressing up in fancy clothes, they would dress up these 4 boys as railroad porters. And they would go down to Union Station and they would sing. And when people would come to hear them sing, the singing porters, people would come to hear them sing, they would hand them cards. I've got one, inviting them, come to our church. Services on Thursday nights if you can't be there on the Christian night of Wednesday. And times when they were putting on plays. They put Prince Nicotine on trial at Nashville First Church one year. But this is how we did our business. We went on adventures. We went to the places where we thought people needed Jesus, and we let the kids loose. It was fun. Do you all go on adventures?
We try to.
You try to. See, that's not.
But that's not the real adventure, is it? You just have to go.
Yeah, you really need to. You remember what Jesus said? Just take enough for the day. I'll be with you. And we. I'm not sure we've got that kind of faith anymore. We ought to. We ought to. But go to the next slide. Keep your eye on the clock. This is my favorite piece. It's actually, I put my 2 favorite pieces of Nazarene history together here. In 1930, a boy from Alabama with the unfortunate name of Hooker, and if you can think of a worse name for a Nazarene preacher than Hooker, I do know that in South Carolina we have Brother Tingle. And, Tingle and Hooker, that's just not good. Not good at all. But a boy named Hooker, he was a great big man like me, parted his hair right down the middle. He went on an adventure. He was an evangelist in the Church of the Nazarene, eventually would be a district superintendent. And Brazee died in 1915, and his church struggled without him. And they kind of got lost, and they needed somebody who could come preach a Pentecostal sermon. And Hooker could do it. In fact, he preached Pentecostal sermons so well, in 1924, they started something called Grace Church of the Nazarene, right over on the other side of Briley Parkway. He preached that revival, and when he was done, they had 100 people. 101 people, excuse me, joined Grace Church. The man could preach. So they called him to Brazie's church, this boy from Alabama. His adventure only lasted 1 year. He didn't stay. His wife never moved. She was from Alabama. She was not going. Women from Alabama do not move to Los Angeles, California. Who's with me? You know, I mean, it's just not hard to figure out. But he went out there for a year, and you can see what he did. Every Sunday was an adventure. 8:30 morning prayer meeting, 9:30 Sabbath school, 11 o'clock preaching, 3 o'clock people's meeting, 5 o'clock they had the glory room service. They would lock themselves downstairs in a room and pray until the glory came. It's really, really interesting. They had a young people service and preaching and evangelistic services. That was just Sunday. You know, we struggle to get folks here twice a week.
Yeah, twice.
Twice a week.
Twice.
Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, but this is what it takes if you want to win the world for Christ. And then they had services during the week. They had Tuesday afternoon holiness meetings. And they met in the afternoons, and they read books together, and they answered questions. What is the holy life? Why does God want us to live a holy life? How does one become sanctified holy? And they answered questions. And then on the back side of the sign, Hooker put that, war declared on hell. Now, you want to catch some people's attention out here? You got a nice sign out there. Yeah. You may want to think about that. I'm just saying, you know. And he only lasted a year, but the church grew by like almost double in a year, and then he went back home to Alabama and became DS. That's just a true story. But, you know, these are markers of our history. Now, let me put in a plug real quick. Give me your attention real quick. Let me put in a plug for the people who do the work that I do. I can only tell you this story because somebody at Los Angeles First Church has lovingly cared for this sign since 1930. Decide what is important. Don't throw away every copy of every church bulletin. If all you keep is a digital copy, make yourself a backup, okay? When you have an event, when you burn a mortgage, when you install a new pastor, you know, take pictures. Make everybody get together like they did at the General Assembly. Get everybody in the frame. I did this for the 75th anniversary over at the college church. And people were like, I said, look, and I just pull up 50 pictures of Nazarene General Assemblies, Nazarene church meetings, Nazarene camp meetings. And they got everybody in the shot together. And, you know, 60 years later, they could say, see, I was that little boy. And somebody took care of this sign. And, you know, the Nazarenes understood they had a mission. You know, one of the things that I don't ask, because I'm just a church historian, I want to know, does anybody have anything this cool? Because let me tell you something, boys and girls, this is Nazarene history gold, okay? I walked into a basement room in Los Angeles First Church on a whim. No idea what was down there. Phineas Brazie's wife's hat. And all of a sudden I realized they all dressed like they were members of the Salvation Army, because they wanted people to think that, like the Salvation Army, they took care of poor people. That was their mission. Now, what's really hard for us all to understand is that in 1905, the Salvation Army was being arrested on the streets of Los Angeles as insurrectionists for getting drunk people excited while preaching the gospel to them, and that is just true. You know, again, you have to live with your history. But take care of your history. Find a place to take care of it and someone to care for it, who will be here when the next pastor and the next pastor and the next pastor comes and goes. Anybody have questions? How much time do we have left? I got a bunch of stuff.
We got about 10. We could probably go to 15
Okay,
because we started late.
Let's go real quick. We'll do real quick. Go to the next slide. This is my second favorite piece of Nazarene history. This is Nashville First Church of the Nazarene, 1929, 1922. That man ran, Harry Wise became the pastor. He had been the Tennessee District Superintendent in 1921, came to the 1922 District Assembly and said, "You're the worst people I've ever tried to take care of. This is the worst job I've ever had. You haven't paid me my salary. You haven't paid the note on the district parsonage. I'm not available for further service." And he had run his own name to be pastor of Nashville First Church, and he stayed there until he dropped dead in the office in 1948. This is just true. Getting his sermon ready for the next Sunday. Married my wife's grandparents. Kids wandered in off the street on a Friday afternoon, walking home from their jobs in downtown Nashville to where they lived. And they said, yeah, it's the day. And they just went over and knocked on the Church of the Nazarene door. And he married them. And this is the First Church fan, the church with a heart interest in humanity. They knew what their mission was. Everybody could tell you. Go to the next slide. Here's the adventure. Unsaved ones, backsliders, names, and addresses. Tell us where they are. We will go on the adventure and find them for you and bring them back. Do you understand what I mean when I say adventure? Yeah, I want to go real quick. Go to the next slide. I'm sorry, we're just going to run. Missionaries have been with us since before we became a church. Mission work was seen as adventure. It was to go on an adventure with God around the world to see what God would do with your life. And they went. That's the earliest missionary work pamphlet that we have. That's 1911. Go to the next slide. And this is Hiram Reynolds, the second general superintendent. He was elected in 1908 with Brazee and Pilot Point. That's him down there at the front of the group picture in the safari helmet. That's 1913, and he went on an adventure around the world and literally visited with, prayed for, and laid hands on every Nazarene missionary in the world. And when he was in Jerusalem, he got his picture made as playing Lawrence of Arabia. And when he would go to churches on Wednesday evenings, sound familiar? Wednesday evenings, right? They, try to get anything to get people to come to church on Wednesday evenings in the summer. He would say, put this photo out and tell them a man who has fought the tigers and the lions is coming to the missionary meeting. He's going to fire live guns and juggle his knives. And he would. And then they'd say, no children allowed. And every kid in the place came because, they've been told this is, and he dressed up as Lawrence of Arabia. This is just true. Again, kids, we didn't have stuff. But we had God and we had great imaginations. It takes a great imagination to believe your life is an adventure being guided by the hand of the Almighty. Yeah, go to the next slide. We got to hurry. This is another trip to Africa. That's the first Nazarene Missionary Society president, the first one elected 1915, Susan Fitkin. When her husband died, they went in the ministry and they found out, as the history book says at Eastern, they were from Eastern Nazarene College, they found out she was the preacher and he was the water boy. That's literally what it says. And she was a real preacher and he wasn't. So he got out of the ministry and started buying things called utility companies. Literally, this is 1900. And by the time he died, he had bought utility companies stretching from Boston to Florida. And when he died, he left $15 million. Or he had amassed a $15 million fortune. His death made the New York Times. He was so rich. And the New York Times said, Brother Fitkin has made $15 million in his life, most of which his wife has spent on the cause of Nazarene missions. She took that money and turned it into adventures. She paid the way for missionaries to go on their own adventures. And she went to Africa, held a VBS, and 34 kids got baptized. And she paid a photographer to go with them and take pictures so that she could come back and tell the story of her adventure, a trip to Africa. Tell me when we got out of time. Keep going.
We're still.
We don't have time to do this one justice. We're going to do it real quick. We sent that quartet, remember the singing porters? We sent them all over Tennessee and the Southeast. This is a bill from that was on a telephone pole that somebody lovingly pulled off a telephone pole, rolled up, and stuck in a family Bible from Jackson, Tennessee. They go to Jackson, Tennessee to sing in a Nazarene tent revival at Royal and at Lafayette and Royal Streets. During the revival, a 14-year-old tall, skinny kid gets saved. And his mother allows him to go in an open-air car. This is 1924. Yes, 1924. And his mother allows him to ride as 14 years of age in an open-air car to California with the Nazarene pastor. They're not Nazarenes, they're Methodists. And his father forbid him to go, so of course he went. He snuck off one night, got in the car. They go to California. Go to the next slide. And they're at what we now call the Nazarene Youth Congress, the National Nazarene, it was the Nazarene Young People's Society. Anybody remember NYPS meeting? And he goes down to the altar to get sanctified, and an old man comes down out of the choir and says, "What do you want God to do for you?" And the boy tells him, and there's the old man. The old man, C.W. Ruth, he was Phineas Bressee's right-hand man. He was the guy who brought all the Nazarenes together in Pilot Point. He was a world-famous preacher from Indianapolis. He had preached literally at that time in 48 states, so think about it for a minute, and in 5 foreign countries. He was well-traveled, and by this time he's old. And he prays with this boy, and the boy told me, he said, "I didn't get sanctified, but I've never forgotten the Christian kindness." And he wrote me a card and said, "I'll be praying for you till God fills you with his Holy Spirit." The little boy, go to the next slide, was named William Greathouse, who may be the greatest of all the Nazarene general superintendents. That's what adventures produce. They produce great stories and wonderful converts. That's what adventures with God are for. Time?
We're good. We've got time. We can.
Oh, we can go more? All right, go to the next slide.
Yeah, you got a
You're
few
sure you
more.
got, let's go past that slide. That's boring. Go past that slide. Yeah, this guy goes on a great adventure. See the African-American gentleman, you see me up there in that one slide? That's Charles Johnson. Charles Johnson was from Florida. He was won by an interracial church of the Nazarene in the 1950s. Is anyone listening? He was an apartment kid. They knocked on doors. His mother let him go to church with white people. They had an interracial church. They were having a tent revival, and he got saved. And the Church of the Nazarene was segregated in those days. So we sent him to the Black Bible College in Institute, West Virginia. When I told you that the Nazarene Historical Society is doing its 4th historic registry sign, it's with the folks in Institute, good friends. And Johnson so he goes to the Nazarene Bible College, and in those days, there weren't very many black Nazarene churches. There still aren't. It's a shame. And they sent you to places. You didn't sort of feel called. As they told you, hey, we have a need. So they sent him to Mississippi. And if you do not know the Charles Johnson story, that book, Called to the Fire, is worth the read. It was written by my student, Chet Bush. Charles Johnson died after 62 years of ministry to the people of Mississippi. He was the only African American allowed by the federal government to testify in the Mississippi burning murder trial. When the young workers, James Chaney, and I'm trying to remember the other gentleman's, the white gentleman's name, but they were voter registration folks. One of them lived in the church. He knew them. Charles Johnson sat on a platform praying for those kids and for the community and their families after they were killed with somebody named Martin Luther King Jr. Adventures, kids. One of the reasons we have not is because we ask not, and one of the reasons we have not is because we go not. Yeah. We have to stand up for what's right. We have to be willing to go on a bit. Charles Johnson went on adventures.
Yeah, read that book or listen to it, whatever. It's an amazing book and an amazing story of someone who truly believed that the Spirit of God could move and change you.
And moved in communities. I mean, just an amazing man who I happened to get to know. And that was the very first sign that the Nazarene Historical Society put together. Do we have time for one more? Yeah. All right, one more. Go to the next slide. Even the manual goes on adventures. I don't have time to bore you with this, but one of the really remarkable things about the Church of the Nazarene is that we are a church that is made up of 17 different churches. You know, you hear about churches splitting, and that's how churches start. The Church of the Nazarene's history is a history of churches getting together to do the work of Christianity, the work of holiness ministry. And we had 16 members until 1988. And in 1988, the last member joined, the last church joined the Church of the Nazarene. That's Jeremiah Yukadim. He was the superintendent of the Nigerian Nazarene Church. We did not know they existed. They had never heard of us. Someone, a missionary or a soldier of fortune. There are two great legends. And by the way, when the facts no longer fit the legend, print the legend, kids, said the historian. And we don't know who left it, but in about 1940, somebody was traveling through Nigeria, okay? And they left a manual behind, just like on a bench at a bus. And Jeremiah Yukadim found it and started a church. And in 1988, almost 50 years later, somebody was riding through and saw this Church of the Nazarene, went over and knocked on the door, and he said, "Hey, I'm a Nazarene." He said, "No, you're not. We're the Nazarenes." And he said, No, we're the Nazarenes. No, we're the Nazarenes. After about 2 years of negotiations, they joined the Church of the Nazarene with about 400 churches and 10,000 members. Kids, even our manuals go on adventures. Adventure's everything. Go to the next slide real quick. This is the end. Go to the next slide real quick. Our history has much to teach us. Next slide. All we have to do is pay attention. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
What I did.
I hope you get a little taste for this. History can seem dry and boring, but it's an adventure. I was imagining when you were talking about some of this, when I was in my 20s, I was pastor at Woodmont Christian Church. I was the youth pastor there. The Woodmont Christian Church.
The Woodmont?
Yeah, the white one with the giant steeple. I was only there about 90 days, but that's another story.
I sang there once.
Yeah.
Just the one time.
But I remember going through all the little hallways and stuff. There's a mansion, there's a church. It's even grown more since I was there. And I dug up these two books, and they were the history of the Woodmont Christian Church. And at that time, I was a part of that tradition. I'd been Church of Christ and then mainline liberal with the disciples. But that history told me who that church had been, who that church was, and who they could be. We have some of that same stuff here, believe it or not. Through all the strife and troubles, we found things that connect us throughout the time, and we've connected. I remember Grace Church used to have walls of all their pastors
I helped them
through the
take it down.
decades. Yeah. And Christy walked me up when we first attended there and showed me her grandfather, George Scott, who had been pastor at Grace Church when it was down in East Nashville.
Secretary of Evangelism at the Church of Nazarene.
Yeah. You know, DS, all kinds of stuff. He had a television also. His was on wheels, so they could put it into the closet.
Once upon a time, all the evangelists dressed like bankers. It's the oddest time in Nazarene church history, from about 1940 to 1960. And Scott was as good a banker as you ever met in your life. He's a great pastor, a great pastor.
So, obviously, I don't have that history, but I heard a lot of it when Christy's parents lived with us, the good and the bad. And I think we need to know all of those things.
Did you just say that your in-laws were mean to you on occasion? Is that what you just
Yes,
said?
that's exactly, yeah. But I think, so for us to remember our history, because it does go very deep when we talk about Christianity itself, but even as Nazarenes, and I love the Star Trek type story of the manual
It's amazing.
being found on a bench and somebody creates a church.
I mean, I tell that story to, well, you know, when I was at seminary, I learned a word that I didn't know existed. I was taught in a class that there are Nazarenes and there are non-Nazarenes. And I said, excuse me? And the professor went on and on. I said, so you mean like the million of us and the 6.5 billion non-Nazarenes in the world? You know, it's just the strangest things that go on out there.
Yeah.
I tell that story to people who are not Nazarene, and they don't believe me. And so, fortunately, there's internet evidence, which apparently, if anything's on the internet, it must be true. Okay?
Yeah.
So, but, I mean, it really is an amazing story.
It's amazing stuff, amazing adventure. We're on an adventure. We've got the next page in our story beginning here in a couple of weeks. So be in prayer for that. Be thinking about our community. You know, we don't know exactly what the future holds, but we know where we've been, and we know where we are now, and I think we can see where the future is. Would you close us in prayer tonight, please?
I will. Father in heaven, we're grateful this evening for life, health, and strength and the blessings of this day that has now just passed from us. We're grateful for your presence with us throughout the day, for your watch care over us. And we're grateful for your presence in these moments tonight.
We pray that you would bless the thoughts of our hearts, deliberations of our minds, the future of this church. We pray for the new pastor and his family as they come. Give them guidance and wisdom. May in all things we do honor you. Now, as we leave this place, go with us, guide us, watch over us, and keep us safe so that we might love and serve you all our days. We ask in Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you. Is the stream turned off? I'm just asking before yeah.